Some of you, how many of you all heard my presentation last year, just so I can kind of know my audience? Okay. Well, I'm glad I didn't do the exact same thing. So it's somewhat different this year, but I did add on to it a little bit. So I had Mr. Summers' able assistance last year running the computer, but hopefully we will get through it this year if I can press the right buttons. Tim asked me to talk a little bit about the east end or actually Pulaski on the Bristol line, and as I got into it, I actually expanded a little bit kind of on the eastern end of the line, a little bit beyond Pulaski. But being a lover of good literature, I started out last year with a quote from Ed King, and this year I thought to do that as well from our old N&W Historical Society member and author, the late Lewis Newton, who was as good a writer and storyteller as he was an engineer, apparently. So he wrote about a trip from Bristol to Radford, and it was notable just in terms of how our old railroad that we love performed. The trip, November 1945, was interesting, the running time, and I love the fact that J number 603 between Bristol and Radford, or Bristol and Roanoke, made up 33 minutes. I think they were like an hour and a half behind. So considering the profile of the Bristol line, how many curves and grades there are, they did. Evansville was part of the Virginia and Tennessee, incorporated in 1848, and they got to Bristol by 1856. So the U.S. Postmaster General, and Dr. Shear knows a lot more about that than me, had it as part of the Great Southern Mail Route from Petersburg, Virginia to New Orleans. There was also the Great Southern Dispatch Freight Route as well, taking part of the Southern Railway connection at Bristol. And the thought was there was more merchandise freight, but as the coal market began to open up, the expansion into the coal fields up toward Ohio and through West Virginia diminished the railroad's importance. So, and it also shifted physically the main line of the railroad away from Radford. So, the Bristol line was interesting and caught my attention because in steam days I love passenger trains. The scheduled passenger trains outnumbered freight trains, and that was because the Southern Railway used it as much more of a passenger route than freight route, so it was a little bit shorter than sending their passenger traffic through Atlanta, since time was important on those lines. So there are three branch lines, or were three branch lines on the Bristol line. So, and the one that got the most attention was the least busy one. It saw the smallest motive power, the Abingdon branch. Grant's going to talk about another one of the branches tomorrow, I think, the North Carolina branch that was the longest one and saw a lot more traffic than the Abingdon branch. So the Saltville branch, we were initially going to have a presentation on that, but unfortunately some family issues got in the way there with the author of that. But that was said to be the 9 most profitable miles of the Norfolk and Western because of the drywall plant there, the gypsum mines that were there, and also the Olin Matheson complex. So, and I also liked, it was sort of unique, the Bristol line wasn't much of a coal hauler. In fact, most of the coal, Ed King has told me, that moved over that line was actually, came from the interstate railroad. So a lot of it did end up on the Saltville branch with Olin Matheson. So I kind of love that phrase again, it was an old line, not readily changed. So it was Hillendale running, single track. The N&W put just enough money into it to keep it state of the art, but they never double tracked it. They added CTC to it, but they kind of kept their expenses commensurate with the traffic on it. So, which is why you still see to this day some of the grades and curves that are there. But it was as well engineered as they could at the time, and they maintained it well through the years. So a little bit about Radford. As of 1881, again, the N&W, the new N&W at that point, was pretty much between Norfolk and Bristol. Radford was what was called, I've heard it called Central or Central Depot, or both. It was a division point and engine terminal between Lynchburg and Bristol, given the distances that steam engines could run without servicing. So that was a lot larger than you would think today if you look at what's here now. They did a lot of work here then when this was part of the main stem of the N&W. So as towns tended to do, they changed the name. So Central Depot was renamed Radford in 1887 after a local notable citizen. And about that time, the N&W had discovered coal, and they were trying to find ways to get up into the coal fields. So they started building a new river extension that kind of hit up into the Pocahontas coal field. And the opposite center of the railroad, and a lot of the traffic began to shift away from Radford. So this photo kind of tells the tale of what's going on there and what it looked like in years past. You can still see, I don't know exactly what the scene looks like today, but the left line all the way going out into the photo, that was the New River Spur. The Bristol line still uses the middle line there. Let's see if I can get the laser pointer to work. Right there is the current Bristol line bridge. And this bridge here was the original line to Bluefield on what I call the roundabout route. I think Richard Prince may have used that word. But it had a 1.46 grade that loaded coal trains had to face. So the N&W tried to find ways around that to try to come up with a lower grade routing. So, but man, that would have been something to see with two main lines right there, right up the road here. This is a view I shot 1992 going across the New River behind 611. Those were times we thought would be around forever, but I'm glad we had them while we can. I think that's a buddy of mine's arm right there. I was a newlywed then, but the missus gave me permission, me and a couple of my buddies, we drove all night from St. Louis to Bristol and then kind of rode this excursion. So it was a great time. That's another view taken from the highway bridge of kind of the Bristol line bridge going across the New River there. And you'll notice the piers here that kind of go into nowhere. Those are from the old main line. It took me a while to figure out what those were until I got Richard Prince's book in the days before the internet, when you had to scrounge a lot harder to find information. And one more with Action and Feeling from our good N&WHS member who's helped me out in about 3 years with photos, Harry Bundy of 611. It wasn't a 92 excursion because this one has 2 diesels in the consist, but there's 611 heading across the New River. A little bit more on bypassing Radford, which you can tell is a subject that kind of fascinates me. The New River line, again, was built 1881-83 to hit that first coal mine in Pocahontas. And the main line, again, came through Radford, but the new line was completed in October 1900, and it kind of literally, the branch was just east of Radford. So the junction of the new main and the old Virginia and Tennessee line was named Walton, and it was to become a key junction on our favorite railroads. And there's the famous BH Tower that is, it's been featured in many books, and I have a article, actually can make its way around here. I'm sorry I didn't get more photocopies made of it, but it was in a 1958 issue of the N&W magazine about Walton Tower, which also known on the railroad name was BH Tower. It began operation when the new line opened, and the N&W being big on investment in properties, busy properties, it was updated several times. The tower inner workings and the interlocking materials, at least up through 1952, when they kind of replaced or installed electro-pneumatic switches to control the interlocking plan. So it was, as I understand it, a popular hangout for rail fans for good reason, as it was a busy place with the main line to Bluefield going through there and the Bristol line. And there was a lot of action, a lot of trains that came through there. So this shot, shows one of our favorite J's again. Let's see, one more. All right, this is a ground level view of BH Tower from my old buddy Ed King. He sent me a 5x7 of that years ago. He may have actually sent me the negatives, and I had some prints made. It worked, but that's number 16, heading east, blowing by there. And I think that may have been mid 50s. That's the Bristol line right there branching off. And for those with good eyes, you'll see a Y6 there. I think that some of the experts can help me here. That may have been the helper track. Right,
yeah, it is.
There. So yeah, okay. That's what I figured, but I hate to assume.
One point, number 23, and some of the lesser trains, they went around into Radford at the station and then backed out and went on west on the main line. Back in the, up until about the 40s, I think.
Okay. Yeah, Radford was an important place. So finally we get to Pulaski, which was what I started out doing this clinic about. But this photo from Doug Midkiff, he sent me, I wish I had a better copy of it. Doug's no longer with us, but this was the Tennessean heading west in Pulaski in the year that CTC was installed, because the old semaphore signals came down in there. So you can see, looks like in Class M over there. And Pulaski was for a midpoint home to the North Carolina branch, or junction with the North Carolina branch. It was for a small town, it was a pretty busy place in those days. So. Go back. I'll get the hang of this, yeah. Even on a bridge line, you know, there was a lot of action there. So I always like this photo that I got from Ken Marsh from his collection that was shot by R.A. Crawford. This is a Class A, and for those who get into the details of such things, Mike Rector, I'm looking at you back there, so wherever you are, you'll see this. The A, you can't really see it in the photo, it still had the boiler tube pilot on it before they went with the solid pilot. So there was, Mr. Crawford was on a passenger train that was heading east.
Yeah, that was used on 41 and 42, and also 25 and 26, the old Memphis Special. Back in those days, the A's were.
Yeah, before the J's came along, yeah, they, you know, on the heavy trains, given the grades and the curves, they did that. But man, I would have loved to have heard that scene going by, that A going by there. This is kind of a teaser for the trip to Pulaski that's on the agenda. It's a beautiful depot there. I always love the detail of the building and that sort of thing. There's a scale on the track side there, or maybe on the other side there, that survived, I guess, the 2 fires, as I understand it, in there. But the building was destroyed by fire 120 years after it was built, but thankfully it was rebuilt. I shot this photo last year when it came through there. I was going to try to see the layout that we're going to go see that's on our agenda this year, but it was closed when I was coming through last year, heading up to Roanoke to the convention. So. This is the track side of Pulaski Depot. You'll recognize, yeah, some of the buildings, like some of the buildings there, I think maybe one had been removed, but a lot of them hadn't changed much since 1942. This was a photo I shot in '87. I think I was heading up to I think it was the N&WHS convention that year. I think may have been in Roanoke, so I was heading there. But the Bristol line at that point, we were hearing rumors it was going to be sold off to a regional operator or something, because it was still jointed rail, you'll see there. And the track closest to the depot had actually been cut off, for lack of a better term, and there was this maintenance of way train there then. So the future of that line was upgraded. So. This is from a 1938 track chart that was in my possession. I actually got from the Mercantile Library in St. Louis, again, pre-internet days. They were not, well, they were making copies of it in those days, but I included the 2 views there because this shows the little bit of the area around there. The yard limits for Pulaski Yard actually spanned 3 miles of track. So there was a lot going on here. And this is a close-up of kind of yard in the terminal there. There's engine terminal, there was a turntable, there were all sorts of industries in and around there. And you can kind of see the profile here of the railroads. I think the ruling grade, 1.3 something or the other, starts right outside of just east of Pulaski. So it's pretty hilly, curvy stretch of railroad. This is courtesy of the N&WHS.org archives, or archives online. This is a view of Pulaski Yard looking east. The railroad put some money in there. I mean, it had, for a midpoint away from the main line at that point, it had a concrete coaling tower, you had a nice ash hoist over there, and you had a brick single stall engine house, and there was a turntable in there between the coaling tower and the engine house there. Now, I've heard it called an engine house, just from the way it looks, other views I've seen, it sure looks like a lubritorium to me. So I don't know if any of the experts here have the definitive answer, or if anybody remembers. But
about the same construction as the lubritoriums.
Yeah, yeah. It would have served some of the same purposes, I guess. But the N&W knew how to service steam engines efficiently, so that they did that here. This is another view of Pulaski looking the opposite direction. Got a Class M working a string of hoppers there. Given what I've heard about the how coal traffic was handled there, I wonder if that, or I suspect that might have been company coal for the locomotives there, or ash, depending upon what what was in that string. But you can see a string of maintenance of way equipment in the back there, so nice consist there. The skies looked a lot clearer than they have done this week there. So, but again, it was 1954. So I spent not enough time wandering around Pulaski on my various excursions down here to Railfan. And during one of my trips in 2009, I found a string of maintenance of way cars that were waiting at Gym City Jump just east of the Pulaski Depot. I'm sure nature is reclaiming it by now, but on my early trips there was an old Norfolk and Western combine that sat in that scrap yard for years. I think it disappeared years ago, so I think they finally converted it to razor blades or paper clips or something, but it sat there for years. Okay, now we'll take a little closer look at Pulaski, which is, I wish on my model railroad I had more room. I modeled Pulaski because there were some interesting things about the place. So I had old black and white copies of Sanborn charts, but it looks like the Library of Congress is slowly getting them online in color. So this one, there is I will pass around to a copy of some of the key slides there. I only put, if you could take a look and work it around the room here. Again, for a bridge route, there was kind of the Southern Railway's way to get traffic from the East Coast and start heading to the South and the Midwest. I'm amazed how much online industry the Bristol line had in steam days and beyond. So this is what the N&W wrote about in the magazine in the rolling mill track. I'll pass around another. I'll start with Tim here. That is an article the N&W magazine did in 1952 on Pulaski. It was considered significant. Well, they wrote about everything in those days in the magazine. But this one little spur is almost like a little mini branch line, just in terms of all the industry that's there. And again, on a branch line of the railroad. So it began here with this bridge over Peat Creek. It always was a cute little bridge. But just that one little line, I mean, you had Southern States Co-op, there was a chemical plant, there was more than one feed mill and store operators. There was at least one coal company, at least one oil company. There was a lumber company, a sawmill, a furniture plant, and a factory that made television. So along just this one spur, it was only about a half mile long. So, and there were a lot of other industries that N&W magazine said there was something like 24 industries in Pulaski at that point that they serviced. Just a couple of shots of some of the industries along the rolling mill track. There's an oil dealer here. Now this isn't on the rolling mill, but it was one of the other big industries. In the time I've been following the Bristol line over the last 30 years, I think it's been a couple of different industries. Every time I go by, it has a different name on it, but it's for a fairly small town. It was a decent sized industry, and there were a couple like that in Pulaski that may, some of them may still be rail served actually. I was talking about somebody at this with dinner, but this is the freight house in Pulaski. My first couple of trips there, before again the internet provided a lot of information, I came through town, didn't even know what it was, because you wouldn't know unless you had historical sources that this was the freight house for the railroad. It's pretty good size. They must have had a lot of LCL traffic through there. And there were a couple of spurs and steam days, I think more than one that served it, but the railroad did a lot of business there, and it was still there last year, I think, when I went through there. So the N&W magazine, I think, described Pulaski as a place that has all the essential elements of railroad, and I think that's true. So you had a yard, you had a shop, a passenger station, and a large freight station as well. Hopefully you all can get a chance to take a look at that this weekend as well. So, heading 15 miles to the east to Radford, again a Sanborn chart here. I was amazed the first time I saw this, again given what's here in Radford today. Look at the size of that roundhouse that dates back to the days when this was the main stem of the Norfolk and Western. A lot of engines were serviced here. And I imagine it was a crew change point in those days, and given the operating distance for steam engines in the early days, a lot of engines, I guess, were changed out here as they headed west or east. So at this point, in 1920, this Sanborn chart dates from 1920, it was a 14-stall roundhouse. I read in Richard Prince's book at one point, I think it was 24-stall. Roundhouse and engine terminal there, so that shows the importance to the railroad at that point. Interestingly, the turntable was only 60 feet long, and apparently it was never lengthened, even though they served articulateds here. So I guess they used that wide track pretty well. That was the only way they could have turned engines there. There was also a tie treatment plant here for the N&W that was pretty large as well. It had its fleet of 3040 plant switchers that serviced it. So it was an operation through the steam era, as I understand it. All right, this is kind of a rail fan shot of Radford, and so you will notice that engine house has gotten a lot smaller through the years. I was going to say 3 stalls, but Mr. Miller's piece.
I think it was 2
Yeah.
last.
Yeah, Ken Miller's piece that he's passed out, that's kind of the teaser to an upcoming issue of the Arrow. Yeah, it's 2 stalls, so yeah, it went from 24 stalls down to 2, but they still had a lot of power they were servicing there. So you've got, looks like a Z there, another Z here. Can't tell whether that's a K1 or a Z, but yeah, they were still, even in the late steam era, they were still servicing a lot of power. This is another roundhouse shot. My good friend Frank was talking about eBay, so this is an eBay shot from my collection. Negative I ended up buying. It shows kind of you got a Y3 there, you got a Class M hiding in the back there. So again, it was a busy place, and the tender of another engine coupled to it. So. More steam age action at Radford. I did some looking around yesterday when I got here, and I knew they were gone and they were being changed up, but I was starting to see the old signal bridges and the old position light signals gone, so now you've got the silver signal bridges and the new modern signals there, so that kind of changes the look of the place a little bit. But here you have a Class M doing some work heading east. It's pointed east, and you've got a K1. It's 115, I think. It's pointed west, so it's kind of doing its thing in Radford as well. So you can tell it's pretty late in the steam era because it was a little dirtier. Or the K1 especially was a little dirtier than the N&W like to keep its steam, as I understand it. So, and a final look at Radford. I love the little building here. I wondered whether that was a sand house, just given that the stove to keep the sand dry there. But this slide characterizes this as the ready track at Radford, and there's a Class M sitting there waiting on its next assignment work. You see the coal hoist in the back, or either coal or an ash hoist in the back. So a couple of more modern views of Radford for the young folks in the room. So although these are 36 years old at this point now, I shot these on a trip through town. You can kind of see a tuxedo unit in the back there, but I just kind of wandered around shooting those. There's one of the landmarks of Radford University there. So it was still a pretty busy place then. Last night I was surprised how much action was going on over there. A train pulled out heading east while I was there, and they were doing a lot of switching over there at 10 o'clock last night. So I'm happy to see it's still an important place on the railroad. So for the passenger fans, here is the business side of the built in the 40s or 50s. I've always found interesting, I guess these were the supports for the platforms, or platform covers that ran out to the sheds closer to the track. So I shot that photo in '87 during a fan trip here, and this was 1992, again on train. You can see 611 right there, down there, kind of, I guess we were pulling out or about to pull out. Looks like from the smoke plume we were pulling out there. But those were kind of the crowds who turned out to see excursions and still do, I guess. So a parting shot here. This photo is in the Society Archives, but I had it in Al Chione's slide of it. It's the Tennessean, a shorter version of it by 1957. The train was getting a little shorter. Some of the heavy head-in traffic disappeared, and some of the people were finding other ways to travel, but it was still a decent-looking, shorter train then. But it's between Walton and Radford at a place called Plum Creek, so it's a pretty part of the N&W, if you ask me. So, in closing, let's see. Well, Frank's not holding up the wrap-up slide.
You started early, you're finishing early, so you're doing great.
Well, that's why my head was turning this way, so I didn't have to look at it.
That's fine.
Holding it up, but yeah, I wouldn't do that to you. Railroading, one of the things I think is underappreciated as we focus on the hardware is railroading really is about the people. Some of the folks that I've met in this group who've informed me about the way things were, many of whom are no longer with us. I mean, it used to be a lot more of a people-focused business. These days there are a lot more electronics and all, but it really is about the people, both in our hobby and worked on the railroads that we love, that this is really about. So this guy has this young lady in the cab, and I think he was buying a newspaper from her or something, if I remember the story correctly, on the Abington branch. So thank you to all for sitting through me once again, and I appreciate that. I included this shot because this is actually at Bristol, the roundhouse right here. It's one of the two big steel water tanks there. Nobody or very few people shot the cabooses, the trains going by that spot. Everybody shot the motor power, the passenger trains, but that's the only photo I've ever seen of a caboose of one of the freight trains heading east there, out of there. So I include that to kind of close out. So thank you all for your attention. We've got a fair amount of time for any questions, so please jump in. I look at this as a group discussion, folks who can enlighten me. And hopefully, if I don't, well, the answer should be in this room somewhere between some of us in here, but please, jump in, or I'm happy to try to help or answer or call on folks I know who should know the answer. So, but thank you for your attention and time.
Wasn't it the double stacks that kind of saved the line? When
That's-
they couldn't run through the
Yeah.
Pocahontas
Mhm.
division, so they came down to Old Gap and then up the Bristol line because they had clearance.
That's my understanding of it. In the late 80s, it was still jointed rail. Was still in decent shape, but yeah, the future of it was kind of in doubt, as I understand. Folks in this room probably were a lot closer to that. But yeah, double stacks came along, and yeah, there's only one tunnel on the Bristol line, so and apparently it doesn't pose a problem to double stacks. The Peak Mountain Tunnel. So yeah, the double stacks kind of saved that piece of railroad, as I understand it. So, or kept it in the NS fold, so which I'm happy for that. So.
Yeah, they were trying to figure out how to do it, but they wouldn't fit through like Pepper Tunnel and other things. So they figured out if they ran them the long way around through Ranford and whatever, they could go to Midwest that way.
Yeah. I think by the late 80s, there may have been only one. I found a letter from that I'd written Norfolk Southern, and they sent me to Ken Miller, who wrote me back in those pre-internet days. I think they were down to one through train a day and one local on the Bristol line at that point. I think that was 89. So.
Yeah, they'd had two. They had an eastbound and a westbound that would meet somewhere along the way, and then I think they had a local from Ranford to maybe Marion or somewhere or another, something out of Bristol to come to the rest of it, and that was it.
Yeah, it was, even in steam days, I've heard, I remember talking with Jim Boyd years ago. I was, man, why didn't more guys shoot the Bristol line? Because photos of it were pretty rare. Now as people pass away, you'll see a few more photos show up on eBay, but why didn't more guys shoot it? He said, well, you might wait all day and never see a train. He said, a lot of the trains that ran at night. He said, guys went where the action was. That, and the roads weren't that great down in that part of the world then, too. So he said, yes, sir.
Also, the Bristol line was one of the earliest diesel lines in late 1957, I believe.
Yeah, December 31.
New Year's Eve,
Number I heard, yeah.
whatever it was. It was the last steam was ran over that.
Yeah, I always thought that would be a fascinating story. I don't know how many records of that exist, but yeah, December 31, it was pretty much steam, and January 1, it's all diesel. So I imagine some engine men showed up that day with a new form of locomotive. I hope they had been trained on at that point. So.
Some of those shots at Max Meadows were made then. R.H. Smith, who was the president, had written Link that they were going to dieselize the Bristol line at that date, and he told him if he better intended to make any more pictures, he'd better hurry. I have a letter to that effect in my Link files from where I wrote Steam, Steel, and Stars.
It's a funny story, I'll tell you, but that the Bristol line, all the employees, the operating employees that had seniority always liked it because they made pretty good money working the Bristol line. Plus all the officials went from Roanoke to Bluefield, so a lot of the official folks never went to Bristol too much unless something happened, so they always liked sort of being independent. But it was funny, one night, it was one Friday evening, and I'd go down to the tracks and see what's what, when the train from Roanoke came in, down at the crossing, and they usually had one of the, fellas with a lot of seniority, whatever. Well, it was Friday night, and I guess he must have marked off, and they had some extra board fella on there. And he was in the cab, and he had on his Washington Redskins jacket, a Washington's cap, and a pair of pink sunglasses. And that ruined my image of what an engineer was supposed to look like. That just ruined it for me.
Yeah, depending on the love of your team. I forget where I read this, but in steam days, I guess they had a shortage of helpers at the roundhouse one night. So a J came in on a passenger train. They were supposed to wash it and send it back east, but I guess they were short-handed that night. So somebody got the bright idea, well, we'll wash only the side that goes by the general office. So they almost got away with it, but I guess somebody, the Roundhouse Foreman, a couple of days later, got a letter that said so-and-so and such and such. Next time, wash both sides of it. So, but yeah, who's hitting over here?
When I worked on the line in 1971, there were only two through trains.
Trains.
It was RB1 and BR2. The RB1 would work the branch at Saltville,
Oh, wow.
and on weekends, the so-called through trains became mainline locals, and you were 14 hours between Bristol and the yard limit at Roanoke, and you died there.
Huh. Oh, wow.
The locals didn't work on the weekends,
Weekends,
but the
okay.
through trains did.
So did you get overtime for the extra 2 hours, or how did that work?
I didn't get overtime, but the crews were on
okay.
duty for 13 hours and 59 minutes.
Okay.
They had nice campers and boats.
Yeah. The joys of being in management, right? Yeah, you don't get such things.
Yeah, I was a fixed cost.
Yeah, I spent a few years like that. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. That, other question? I'm missing some corners over here. Oh, yes, sir, Mr. Carpenter.
To both of them. So there was a BR1, RB2, and they worked the branch local, they worked the line local Saturday, Sunday. So there were locals out of Bristol, one out of Bristol and one out of Radford that met at Marion and turned back.
Yeah, when they had to, yeah. The guy out of Bristol worked up as far as Max Meadows. The job was bid as a Max Meadows shifter,
Okay.
but he could work up further based on whatever. But they were Monday to Friday only. And one day the Max Meadows shifter didn't work. He went up to Abington.
Abington,
And
exactly.
and I think we went up to Abington
And what day of the week was that?
Thursdays.
Right. It wasn't Wednesday.
I have to check my notes from 1971. I could.
Now, the run out of Radford went to how far? What was the work agreement that you recall?
The guy at Radford also went to
You
Galax.
worked at Bristol?
I worked out of Roanoke.
Oh, okay, yeah, you were.
I was
You
one of the
have to know-
officials who very seldom went down there because there was nothing down there.
Did the Radford local, there was a local out of Radford 5 days a week?
Yes.
What was his territory?
I don't really know.
There was one out of Radford that ran from Roanoke, from Radford to Pulaski, and then they changed it later on from Radford to Marion.
Okay, that's what,
Okay,
that's
yeah.
what we've heard.
Yeah.
The local, they didn't meet in the middle necessarily, except, and it could be some, and depending on the work, right?
Yeah.
But they worked Pulaski or
Yeah, you worked Pulaski, Whitfield,
Marion.
yeah, to Marion, and then you turned and came back.
And then it was, and what we heard, what I recall was it was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday.
Okay.
And then on Wednesdays, the Bristol run went down to Abington and the Radford run went down to Galax.
Galax, okay. Yeah.
That sounds right, because I went to Galax in the middle of the week.
Are you okay?
Well, they had,
They tried to leave me at the canning factory.
Oh, yeah, no, that's,
they had for a while, for a long time, they went every day to Galax, because that was the North Carolina branch, and they got Austinville Live, they got
Right,
tons and
right,
tons
right.
and tons.
Which
of
is my
Austinville
next
Live.
question, if I may.
Furniture plants and
Andre.
Galax and all that.
Or you guys, if this is gonna show some age here, do you recall when the crew base at Pulaski closed and they moved those crews wherever else, typically to Radford? In other words, when did the Galax line crews, I'm gonna call it, and by the way, I always heard Galax, we always heard
Yeah.
Galax line, we call it the North Carolina branch, but when did the North Carolina branch crews, plural, working out of Pulaski, when did Pulaski shut down, the crew terminal? There was a yard job still working there in 1960.